a long interview, and it's the second time I've read through this, so I'm going to screw up a lot while I'm reading, as you've noticed, because, well, first of all, I'm reading this out loud. There's tons of it. My mouth's like getting dry. Should have got a drink. Anywho, Scott Steen from CNET asks, as you said, this is the first time you've, for a home console, explored side-scrolling Mario games after some 3D work that you've done. You had some ideas of things that you wanted to incorporate, but were there any revelations or surprises that you didn't expect in approaching that type of game design again? Miyamoto's answer. It's kind of hard for me to remember, but one of the big surprises was probably the multiplayer, and particularly we found in focus testing that there are players out there who, when they're playing multiplayer Mario with other characters, can have a really good time without really doing much of anything. I can't think of any other examples right now. Warrior.com asks, what do you say to people who think the Super Guide is sort of cheating, and do you think the Super Guide can be applied to different types of Nintendo games like Zelda, for instance? Miyamoto says, I think that a lot of times people will buy a video game, and if they can play through the end, they'll play through the end, but some people will buy a strategy guide or go online. And what we've done here is essentially try to include some of those features within the game itself. But I think with a feature like this, we were able to create it for New Super Mario Bros. Wii, but because from the outset, we intended to try to develop this type of system and include it in this game. Depending on what the priorities are for other titles, it may or may not be included. We can't really promise if it's going to be part of every game moving forward. But at the same time, I also think that there are some types of gameplay that are suited to a system like Super Guide that can potentially help people through the game. And there are some types of gameplay that really aren't. So we'll probably evaluate each title individually and try to determine which one is our best suited for the system. And of course, even just using a game like Legend of Zelda as an example of trying to apply a system like this, it brings up a Pandora's box of questions in terms of, do we show people how to solve the puzzles? How much of the puzzles do we show them solved in order to help them understand the puzzle? Or are there puzzles in the game where they have to show the entire solution to in order for some people to understand it? So it can be a difficult system to apply to some games, but we do see some values in it, and we'll look at different titles individually to see how it can be applied. So Nick Chester from Destructoid asks, something like Wii Fit is very successful, but when it was first introduced, I think people were scratching their heads, and ultimately it was this huge success. But were there any products that you've designed internally at Nintendo that you released and were surprised by the reaction, whether it be negative or positive? Miyamoto said, I don't really remember if there's anything that truly surprised me with the reactions, but one thing I do think that there were still some possibilities with is Wii Music. So Chester asks another question. You think in the future you may do something to iterate on that to maybe make it more successful than it was? Miyamoto says, I think that the development team members on Wii Music were maybe a little bit shocked by the reaction and hoped that it would have got a better response than it did. So I think if we were to do anything, it would be a matter of getting back together with them and trying to understand what their expectations were and where the gap was between their expectations and where the resulting product was. And we've talked about it, but it isn't anything that's concrete at this point. The thing that's interesting about Wii Music is that there are people who are very versed in music, and they play the game and they evaluate the evaluation of it very high, but at the same time there are a lot of people who play it and they don't have a very good opinion of it, so the gap between the positives and the negatives seems to be pretty big, which is interesting. So Jason Cipriano from MTVU asks, Mario 64 pretty much revolutionized 3D gaming and changed the directions of many games that came after it. Do you think that there's been a sort of a 2D renaissance lately, particularly on the Wii, led by New Super Mario Bros.? And if so, do you think it's the developers working within the capabilities of the Wii, or is it driven by the players who want a 2D style game? Miyamoto answers, I don't think everything necessarily needs to be in 3D, or that just because we're seeing more 2D games now, that everything's necessarily going to shift and go back to 2D. Instead, I think maybe we're going on as people are realizing the benefits of a 3D game, and I think at the same time, I think people are remembering what the benefits of a 2 game were. And in particular with a game like New Super Mario Bros. Wii, I think when you're looking at the multiplayer in this game, the multiplayer platforming, I think is much better suited to a 2D environment than a 3D one. I think that people probably going forward, at least on the development side, look at what their objectives of their games are and make their decisions based on the experience they have now and what benefits are of each style. But I think to really make the decision to go 2D, you have to have the courage to not be so attached to the visual appearance of the game and really be kind of pursuing more of the gameplay experience. Because if you're concerned about how the game will be viewed because of its visual appearance, then obviously everybody's going to go more into 3D and a more graphically impressive type of project. So you do have to have the courage to determine what your priorities are and where you want to put your focus. I'm going to end this here.